Welcome to Two United Fans. My name's Kyle.
I'm Notch.
Thank you guys for joining us for another episode. And as you probably noticed at the beginning, we did a little rebranding. We got a few tweaks to our logo, and we also got a new intro. And this is actually because since the Loons are probably going to be joining MLS, we just got the announcement that we're actually going to be joining Major League Soccer podcasting.
It's single entity.
Single entity, pretty cool. But that does mean that they own all of our stuff now, so we had to change it so they can own it. It'll be fine, guys. Don't worry about it.
A lot of people telling us we're the best logo in U.S. soccer podcasting, but had to give it up.
Oh, God. So, anyway, today, what do we have going on, Notch?
Up first, we've got Steve Sandor, longtime Canadian soccer journalist and the color commentator for FC Edmonton. He'll be joining us to talk about that team, their preseason, how they did in 2014, looking forward to their 2015 season as well, and a little piece about Canadian soccer and how it relates to MLS and NASL, which is a topic that's close to his heart and that he's written a lot of articles about.
Very interesting stuff.
Another piece is that, we've covered FC Edmonton as a team, a little bit more about them, their ownership, their supporters group last season. So I encourage you to go back and take a look at that if you're interested. But without further ado, let's kick it over to Steve. Hey everybody, welcome back to Two United Fans. With me is Steve Sandor from FC Edmonton. And Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
So if the good people watching this show, or the one person maybe that is watching this show, wants to find your content online, where can they find you?
At the 11, so the11.ca is probably the site for my blog. But as well, look for our online magazine. It's a digital tablet publication called Plastic Pitch. And Plastic Pitch is now, we're going to have our 5th issue coming out. I'm thinking probably in the next week or so. And that 5th issue is going to deal solely with the idea, should Canada be involved in American leagues? Is it good for us as a soccer nation, or do we need to think about going our own way eventually? It asks the very serious question, talks to a lot of Canadian players and Canadian officials about our relationships with MLS, NASL, and WSL.
So Steve, why don't you take us through what FC Edmonton was doing last year, how the 2014 campaign went very briefly?
It was sort of a Jekyll and Hyde, the spring and fall seasons. The spring season, Coach Colin Miller brought a bunch of new players in. The team really struggled to find their identity. And I think at the same time, the same sort of problems appeared for FC Edmonton that we've seen in previous seasons. The team, we all know it's probably the top or second best team in the league defensively and in goalkeeping. It's sort of always been the trademark, but the reason that Edmonton's always struggled is it can't score goals and ends up losing a lot of 1-0 games or having 0-0 draws. I think there was that one time last year where they had in 2013 where they had 11 1-1 draws, and I know that the odds against that were sort of crazy, but a lot of too many draws, too many one-goal losses, and then all of a sudden the fall, it clicked in. They started off slow, and then through July, I believe their record was even better than San Antonio and Minnesota, that once they were too far behind, but they finished 3rd in the fall season standings. We're in for the playoff race. They pulled themselves right into the playoff race, right to the second last weekend of the season. And all of a sudden the goals started coming, not really from one player, but by committee. And again, Edmonton's defense is so good that they didn't need to score many goals. All of a sudden they could find 2 a game. This team is very, very hard to beat. And going forward, I think they were undefeated in their last 7 or 8 at home. And we're not talking tie. We're talking win, where basically by September, October, everyone in the league was saying this is the toughest stadium to go into in all of the NASL. It's a horrible road trip to the Northwest. It's a long flight for everybody. And it sort of replaced Carolina probably as the toughest place to go in the league. And I think everyone's talking about it going into this season, how this place has become a fortress.
What do you attribute that change to? Did you see something in the tactics that changed? New players coming in? Where'd that come from? Because obviously a big change.
I think it was Colin Miller's decision to move Lance Lang from left back to left mid. It happened right before the break. He thought about it, thought that maybe Lang would be better off as an offensive player rather than a defensive player. It paid off. I think he finished 3rd in MVP voting behind the 2 Minnesota Towers and Ibarra and Ramirez. And, I think he was 3rd on the ballot, if I remember correctly. But I think outside of those two, he was the best player in the league. He's the best left-footed player in the league. And in the second half of the season, when allowed to play on that left wing, crossing the ball, being able to cut in, he scored some ridiculous goals. And I mean, he scored one directly off a corner. He scored in Olympico last year against Ottawa. And that to me was probably outside of that, I think it was the Ramirez goal, was the most spectacular goal scored in the league last year. But Lance Lang's move was a catalyst for this team to start taking chances moving forward. And I think some of the newer players they brought in got some time to settle in. Players like Richie Jones, who came in from England, took him a little bit of time to get used to, the travel, playing a lot of games on turf, dealing with some of the challenges of playing in North America. And then by July, it was sort of okay. And then these guys started playing. Tomi Ameobi started scoring some goals. And as said, it all started falling into place. So, moving forward, they're not looking at making a ton of changes to this team because they felt that from about mid-July on, this was one of the elite teams in the league. And I think they're looking forward just to keeping that core together this year.
Fantastic. Yeah. On that subject, can you tell us a little bit about some new signings, maybe some changes that have happened since last year, and a little bit about FCE's camp this year in the preseason?
I'd say the three big signings that they have made. They brought in Thomas Grenito, a very young El Salvadorian prospect, played at the Under-20 World Cup with El Salvador, was actually named a man of the match at one of the El Salvador games at that Under-20 World Cup. He's regarded as one of their top young prospects. And they brought him in. FC Dallas was going to have a look at him, but he chose instead to sort of take a more, secure contract than maybe go to FC Dallas and go up and down USL and what have you. He decided that it was better to be in a place where he knew what was going to happen with him. But bringing him in as a holding mid, maybe replacing some minutes that Neil Halavity had because Neil Halavity's moved on to Carolina. Then you have Oscar Houghson from Iceland, recommended by Tomi Ameobi, who played against him in Iceland. You say, Iceland, but then you remember Iceland's national program is actually pretty good right now. They're churning out a lot of good players. And the scary thing about Oscar Houghson, if you look at him online, he looks just like Thor. I mean, it's crazy. The long blonde hair, the sort of the shadow, and I think fans are gonna have a lot of fun with it. He's a right winger. They expect him to do a lot in terms of crossing the ball. And then Sani Niasi, the speedster who used to play in MLS, played in Finland last year, is now back in North America. And again, he's expected to add some speed behind the strikers. To create some things down the wings because that foot speed, I think, replaces Horace James, who's a speedster who they didn't hold on to for this year.
I noticed that you didn't include Matt Van Oekel as a big signing.
The thing with Matt Van Oekel, and this is no offense, but he's a steady influence. This team already has the guy who won the Gold Gloves. Edmonton's goaltending is sort of ridiculous. When you think of the top three guys in goals against average in the league last year, they have now number one and number three. In John Smits at number one, Matt Oekel, who was Matt Van Oekel, who was at number three, I believe. That's a pretty ridiculous bounty. And I know you guys in Minnesota were talking about who's going to play in net this year for this team. And then you look at Edmonton, where their backup is probably better, whoever's going to back up, than 90% of the NASL. And that's sort of a scary place when you look at Edmonton, how good they are in the back and how solid they are. There are injuries that always crop up in Edmonton because of the turf we play on. I mean, it's better. We replaced it over the change between the two seasons. But still, you always get injuries. You train on it every day. We've never had in Edmonton a season where a goalkeeper's gone through it healthy. I expect to see both of them play this year.
Got it. Yeah, and I think from what we've heard on our side, Van Oekel was ready for a move too, so it worked out well. And you guys will be stacked and ready to hold on to those 1-1 draws all year this year.
0-0 draws maybe.
So let's talk about that a little bit then. Ending last year, you were just saying that the team was actually starting to score, the defense was solid. Now you've made some good signings. What do you think that's going to do going into this year? Has this team's identity changed at all? You see them getting more of the scoring side, or do you still see them trying to hold on to those low-scoring games and peg out a few goals to win it?
I don't necessarily think they're going to change in the sense that they're low-scoring games, but I do think now they have enough goals spread throughout them that they can win a lot like they were winning in the second half of last year. The spring season is bizarre, simply because with the Women's World Cup coming, Edmonton's got to clear out of their stadium by the end of May, and they can't play at home again for almost 2 months. So the schedule is really top loaded. I think Edmonton actually plays 6 of their 7 home, they have 5 home games, and I believe they play them almost all in a row. After they play the opener in Jacksonville, and then they're going to go and play at home for a long stretch. And again, with Edmonton's home record, I can see this team, if they play like they did last year at home, they're going to run away and hide at the top of the standings, and it'll be everyone almost demoralizing if they can open up a 6 or 9 point lead on everybody, and then everyone's got to reel them back in when Edmonton starts having road games, because this team still doesn't travel well. Hot weather games are always a problem for this team. Going to San Antonio in August or Carolina and even in May is a bit of an ask when you don't train in those kind of conditions regularly. For example, Edmonton, because they're playing in Jacksonville to open, it's going to Florida next week, and they are going to stay there. They are not coming back because they want to get acclimated to the heat and humidity, which for us at this time of year is just awfully punishing. And Edmonton just doesn't ever get that humid. So those are things that they're going to deal with. But with all those home games, if you ask me to rate their roster compared to the rest of the league, I would say right now they're number 2 after Minnesota being 1. Certainly this Edmonton team, at least talent-wise, you say, yeah, they're deeper than the Cosmos. They're deeper than Tampa. They're deeper than Carolina.
Gotcha. So I do have to ask one question. Then obviously you're really high on this team. You think it's going to be a good year. But I'm going to force you to pick out the weakness. What is something you see as the Achilles heel this year? What's one thing you're worried about or one thing they need to take care of?
Well, it's a depth of striker. I mean, they have Daryl Fordyce and Tomi Amiobi and Frank Jonke. Frank was hurt a lot of last year, concussion issues. Tomi scored goals in the second half of the season. But again, they sort of depend on the scoring by committee. And if even one or two of those guys gets cold, they don't have that lean-to guy. They don't have Ramirez or Campos of previous years where you say, look, if the team's not scoring somewhere, he's going to find a goal out of nothing. They don't have those kind of guys that can create a goal out of nothing.
So let's shift our focus just a little bit to some slightly broader things. Before we started filming today, you were telling us a little bit about some of the really cool things that FC Edmonton has done on the broadcast side, because you're the color commentator, and I expressed some surprise at you that I hadn't heard some of the, incredibly cool things that your team is doing. You have a broadcast van over there. You have some, serious equipment making broadcasts, and we've noticed the quality when we watch. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you was, where does FC Edmonton fit into the landscape of sports in Edmonton as a city? Because, you have the Edmonton Oilers over there. And also, how does it fit into the greater North American soccer landscape, in your opinion?
Well, I think, obviously it's a challenge. And I think FC Edmonton, the biggest challenge they've had, I don't know of a city in North America that's had so many sort of fly-by-night, crazy, poor attempts at starting pro soccer, both indoor and outdoor, over the last 20 years in Edmonton. So when Tom Fath came in and said he's going to have a franchise, there was a lot of people rolling their eyes going, oh no, not another team that's going to last, 3 months or what have you. If you remember our A-League USL team, when it was called the A-League, lasted about 3 or 4 months before it went bankrupt, because they had this vision of filling Commonwealth Stadium, next door, the 65,000 seat stadium where the Women's World Cup is going to be opened. And they got a normal USL sort of crowd for it, and they went bankrupt really fast. The people remember those kind of things. I mean, obviously Edmonton's a hockey city. You have the Oilers. Even as bad as the Oilers have been for the last decade, it still consumes this city, much as the way that the sport consumes most of Canada. Then you have the Eskimos playing in the summer in the Canadian Football League in the fall. And you're up against that as well, because, the Canadian Football League, this is a very, very strong market for it. So you're up against that as well. And, I mean, they have a mainstream television deal. They've had that for years, longer than I think almost any other team in NASL has been on normal TV, regular TV with their games. And even national TV at some points. that they've had some penetration, some success on the broadcasting side, but this team, as Tom Pfaff has told me, won't be break even until they get 8,000 or 9,000 a game. That's the way they're budgeted. The problem is the stadium only holds 4,500 people. This team cannot make money as long as they stay at that capacity Clark Stadium. So what they need to do is they have a deal with the city. If they can sell that out regularly, they'll get the money to boost the stadium to 10,000 people, or look at building a new facility that can hold 10,000. But they need to have those steady sellouts, which they don't get in order to get to that next stage. So it's a huge leap of faith still by the ownership to be hanging in this long, to be looking at it and saying, at what point do we click? Do we get that 4,500 a game and sell out Clark Stadium so the city council can say, yes, there's that recognized need and want, and we can go and expand the stadium so you guys can actually be in the black. We're not talking major profits, but just not losing money.
Gotcha. And I think one last thing before we let you go here is you wanted to talk a little bit about your views on Edmonton's fit within just NASL itself. A lot of times, obviously in any league, the big teams get the press. But Cosmos, Minnesota, San Antonio tend to get a lot of the press. But even outside of that, sometimes I get the feeling you think that Canada doesn't get even its fair share among the smaller teams.
I mean, there's lots of issues that arise, it's true of both MLS and NASL, and I think a lot of people think there's a lot of differences, but there's a lot of politics that are the same. One is neither league has a real top official who's Canadian, who actually understands the Canadian market, and sometimes they do things not realizing that we're a different country. And there's certain things like border. Fort Lauderdale's been brutal, actually, in the last couple of years, where they've sent. I don't think I've seen Fort Lauderdale, and I was talking to Kartik Krishnaiyer about this in South Florida. If he could remember a time that Fort Lauderdale's actually sent sort of like an A team to Edmonton, because they always have visa issues. They always have these issues that, oh yeah, we need to get those foreign work permits for our guys. Yeah, because you're a different country. So they're always sending whatever skeleton crew of guys they have because so many players haven't got their work visas. Travel's a bit more of an issue, but I mean, it's just distance. But as well, some challenges on the rosters. I mean, there are some issues that NASL hasn't worked out in terms of contracting that make it a little bit more challenging for Edmonton to even, let's say, trade players or acquire players from American teams. And I think the biggest stick is still, as a Canadian, and it's the thing that we have been pushing for a long time, is American players are domestics on Canadian team rosters. So, Matt Van Oekel is domestic, right? But if you sign a Canadian, like you guys had Mozzie Diorio as a depth player last year in Minnesota, he counts as an international on the American team's roster. Now, MLS has said there's labor laws. I've written about this extensively. I've called the U.S., the Department of Labor, and they've said that's not true. They've said it's not true at all. They said that as long as it's a league rule, as long as you don't force a player to be Canadian or you force a team to hire a Canadian, then that's a problem. You can't force an American firm to hire a foreign national. But if you give them an option of just saying on the league rules that he's not going to count as a international hit against us, well, that's a league rule issue. And again, there's different legal opinions on this, but it's really starting to stick in the craw of Canadian fans that there's a real sense of discrimination. And I hate this. I hate to use words like discrimination, but it's definitely not a level playing field when you see that Canadian players can't get those opportunities because, let's face it, teams aren't that interested in signing a Canadian as an international player. It's not a very sexy thing to sell to your fans. It's like, oh yeah, we're taking an international spot to sign this young Canadian. People are like, well, he's not Brazilian, he's not English, he's not Argentine, he's not Dutch. So it's a big challenge. And yet Americans can take those spots on our team's rosters. So it's very, very, very skewed towards us helping America get better, but not ourselves get better. And this is part of that discussion we're going to need to have eventually. It's nice to have players it's nice to have American players or some American stars playing on Canadian teams, but at what cost to our national program? I mean, we're still getting hammered. Our national program's never been this bad. We've never been this far out of CONCACAF. And since we've got into our relationships with NASL and MLS, it's only gotten worse. Our team, it hasn't helped our program. It's actually widened the gap between the States and Canada and Mexico. We're actually worse off in terms of players not getting playing time or minutes. So it's the big challenge for us going down the road as a country is to say, level the playing field. If you're going to have a North American league, make it a North American league. Don't make the Canadian teams special cases in an American league, because that's what it is right now, and it's what it is in MLS, it's what it is in NASL. And until they address those roster rules, we're always going to feel like we're second-class citizens in our own leagues.
Well, folks, you can hear Steve on the color commentary for FC Edmonton games. I highly encourage you to take a look this year. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time today.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for watching Two United Fans.
Well, and you know what to do next. You can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube to get all the latest news, photos, all this other great stuff that we put on there. Or if you want, you can like us on Twitter, subscribe on Facebook, and follow us on YouTube. Whatever you want to do. But thanks for watching, everybody. Peace out.
Bye.